Welcome to the Authority File, the podcast where you'll hear conversations with academic librarians, technologists, researchers, and authors whose work is laying the foundation for higher education's future. I'm Bill Mickey, your host and the editorial director at Choice. In this four-part series, which is brought to you with support from Overdrive, I'll be speaking with our guests on everyone's favorite scholarly content delivery format, open access. We examine the current state of open access, including the opportunities and pain points for academic librarians, publishers, and researchers. We also look at the role librarians play in supporting open access initiatives, including how that role will continue to play out. Further, we talk about OA funding and its sustainability and look ahead at some important milestones on the horizon. Joining me on the program are Emily Farrell, Global Commercial Director for Open Research at Taylor & Francis, and Jenny Towns, Open Access Librarian at Emory University. In this final episode of our four-part series, we look at the ongoing impact of the Nelson Memo, how OA is driving open research, and speculate on the next important milestones on the horizon for open access. So for a long time, OA has been about, just sort of obviously providing open access. And then I think, the discussion has sort of expanded into open research as well. So I'm wondering if we could talk a little bit about how OA has sort of given way or opened up sort of this open research opportunity.
Part of it is that initially, I think there was a real focus on access. How do you make sure content isn't closed and people can access the output of research? Alongside all these other pressures, like, how do you make sure that research is replicable, reproducible? That sort of brought up and has evolved this conversation about open data and data sharing policies. And so I think that there's become, I think once we got to a point where there were steps made on the open access side, it was clear that it had to go beyond that. It's not just about access to a polished output of some kind. It has to also be about how can someone take data from another study and either replicate that study or perhaps if you're on the open social sciences side, maybe you're taking someone's ethnographic data set and you're using some of that data that hasn't been analyzed. Or, we all know that there's so much data out there that doesn't necessarily get used by a single researcher, and that there's a lot of power in bringing all of that together and allowing other researchers into it in the right sorts of ways. So I think open data is one big piece of it. But of course, there's also things like open peer review, where there's been so much discussion about, is peer review working in the ways that it should? Are there problems baked into the way that double-blind peer review is done? What happens when we open that up? So we work on that specifically with F1000, where the entire platform is open from end to end. So there's an open data, you have to have an open data policy, or there's an open data policy you have to comply with. And then on the other end, the peer review is fully open. The peer reviewers are named. You can read the peer reviews. You can read the response from the authors as to how their article was adjusted and edited in response to those reviews. So I think that it's just the sort of access piece then kind of compelled and propelled all of this forward in making sure that there are all these other ways that we can look at how the system is improved by opening things up across the research life cycle.
Mm-hmm. I'm curious, Emily, do you have any insight into how researchers and peer reviewers may have changed their tone, if at all, in their commentary as now that they know that it's open?
It's a good question, and I unfortunately I don't have anything sort of systematic to provide or sort of an exact analysis, but I do think that having those peer review, having the actual sort of written reports there and readable, I think it does make people more accountable. I think that if you know that other people are going to be able to see those reviews and read them, that you might perhaps you'll be a bit more comprehensive in your response, and also perhaps you'll be. I think it can potentially give people the ensure that people are appropriate in the ways that they respond, and that sort of more considered rather than necessarily going in and sort of tearing something apart, but perhaps being more constructive, knowing that this is a bit more of a dialogue. When you know that
Right.
your comments will then be picked up by the authors, commented on, and then you come back again. I think that there is space for more of a dialogue with a reviewer, which I think is quite constructive.
Hmm. And is that the main goal of open peer review, is to sort of have that level of accountability because it's exposed, or is there some other, purpose for it?
It's primarily about accountability. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's right.
Okay. Okay. Jenny, anything you want to add to the open research question?
Sure. I really see a lot of innovation happening in STEM fields, exploring digital tools for collaboration, experimenting with knowledge sharing, in addition to everything that Emily spoke about. And I've noticed several types of open projects kind of happening in the world at large. And one of my favorite ones that I like to talk about is, you know, finding paying attention to neglected diseases. So you can take data sets from larger studies that had lots more funding, and then you can, as appropriate, as scientifically appropriate, apply those to neglected diseases that don't get as much funding, don't get as much press. And I think that's a really interesting way that open access is driving open research.
Hmm. Awesome. Um, So we the Nelson memo came up earlier, and I know for our audience in particular, this has just been a pretty large thing looming on the horizon, and obviously there's quite a bit in the memo that in terms of how that ends up getting executed on is a big question mark. But I'm curious for each of you, like, how has the Nelson memo, like, sort of worked its way into your daily lives? And Jenny, will stay with you on that.
It has changed the way we talk to researchers, specifically those in the humanities.
Hmm.
For STEM researchers, much of this is old hat. They
Yeah.
know that they need to deposit something in the National Science Foundation's PAR or PubMed or something like that. But for humanities folks, all of a sudden, if they have a funding from National Endowment of the Arts, National Endowment of Humanities, all of a sudden they're faced with, I need to make this work open. And that's not necessarily something that they have explored in the
Hmm.
past, outside of digital humanities or something like that. So we're having to change our messaging, so that we can be better positioned to assist humanities researchers getting an ORCID, navigating an APC that maybe they hadn't considered before, finding a repository, etc.
Okay. And then Emily.
And that's definitely an issue on our side as well, just because again, Taylor and Francis has such a big humanities and social sciences side. We know that this is much newer, and there certainly was an immediate, maybe panic is a bit of an excessive word, but I do think that there's sort of a, what are we going to do? How's this going to affect us? What's next? And I think because of the timeline of plans being submitted, so I know that larger agencies above 100 million have submitted plans already, but we're still the agencies smaller than that, which do tend to skew towards humanities and social sciences, they still have a few more months to submit plans. But the larger agencies have been doing this already. NASA's had great policies in place already. The NIH's open data policy came in already this January. They've really already been on track for this. So that's definitely something that we're looking at and considering how can we best support the humanists and the social scientists in getting there and complying with this mandate or with this memo. And I do think that there's still quite a lot of wait and see. For Taylor and Francis, certainly because we have been working on open access and open research globally, we have had to work and comply with mandates in Europe. already for a good while, and so
Right.
this has already sort of been the direction of travel in a lot of ways. So we have been working on Plan S compliance and things like that. So in some ways, a lot of the groundwork's done for us. But again, it's certainly how can we work in partnership again? How do we make sure that we're supporting the researchers that are going to find this the hardest? How do we provide the sorts of training and education that's needed? And then sort of at scale, what sorts of models do we find are supporting those researchers in the best ways? And certainly I'm aware that there's certainly discussions about how transformative agreements don't serve all the right sorts of purposes, and that there's certain critiques there. But at the same time, when we look at how those agreements support humanities and social sciences researchers, we see an immediate impact. We see an immediate change in how many researchers are able to, from those disciplines, suddenly publish open access where they couldn't before. So it does have an equalizing effect to bring those humanities and social sciences researchers up to where their STEM colleagues are. So although those agreements don't necessarily change the system entirely, there's certainly, we do see that they provide a good step in the right direction. So I mean, I think that's an important piece of the effects of the Nelson Memo in particular.
Right. So curious, what are, some of the next important milestones on the horizon for open access? And, these can be real or wish list, either way. So Jenny, I'll bounce back to you.
As a wish list item, I really hope that one of the next important milestones will be some kind of breakthrough between publishers and libraries. The partnerships and the collaborations that we've been talking about throughout this conversation, I really hope that there's some kind of real breakthrough, and that we can not have as much fear and anxiety and issues over who's going to win out in the end, that sort of thing.
Mm-hmm.
The other thing that I see is I'm really curious to see which publishing model is going to prove the most effective for monographs as well as journals.
Yeah.
Transformative agreements, direct to open, subscribe to open, etc. Maybe it won't be just one; it might be a combination of them. But I'm really curious to see how all of that shakes out.
Yeah, that's a good one. Emily, how about you?
Yeah, I mean, I have to say the same. And it will definitely be interesting to see how this evolves. But just to connect on the books piece, I am a books person. I come from my background is in the social sciences, and I am really happy to see more models out there to support monographs. Obviously, slightly biased. I came from MIT Press when we were developing direct to open, and so seeing collective models that try to get books into the open space. I want to see that continue to grow and become more sustainable, so that we have more access to that book's content. Similarly, I think that the next important milestone is really to see that humanities and social sciences side level up a bit with the sciences side. I think it's been said many a time, but one of the important things that we learned over the course of the COVID pandemic really has been that, yes, you absolutely have to have innovation on the STEM side. You have to have scientists in labs creating vaccines. But if you don't get people to go and get the vaccine, if you don't have social scientists and humanists and people that understand and examine what people do and how behaviors, how you can change behavior or at least understand behaviors, then you're not going to have the whole picture. You're not going to get a population vaccinated. And if you have so much of the science accessible, but you don't have the accompanying social science and humanities, then you just have it's broken. It's not a whole system. So to me, that will be that's a really important milestone for me, I think, is to see that at least equalize. And then to see sort of greater uptake across the research life cycle. So to see a bit more, to see increases in doing more open peer review, more open data, to see that openness across the research life cycle. I think as that increases, I think that's another important milestone to just see that move forward.
Yeah, fantastic. All right, well, that's all the time we have. Jenny and Emily, thank you so much to you both for joining us.
Thank you for having us.
Yeah, it's been a pleasure. Thanks. It's great to talk to you both.
You just heard from Emily Farrell, Global Commercial Director for Open Research at Taylor & Francis, and Jenny Towns, Open Access Librarian at Emory University. This series is brought to you with support from Overdrive. As always, underwriting opportunities for the Authority File podcast are directed by Choice's advertising manager, Pam Marino, and all of our episodes are produced and edited by Choice's digital media producer, Sabrina Kofer, with support from digital media assistant, Ashley Roy. That's all for this week. Thanks for joining us.